In Western Australia, the development of electricity power was mostly done on a small scale by individual shire councils who put in their own little plants, and very often they were direct current, and that was to supply the township with light and power. Until in the 1940s it was decided that Perth City Council, who was also its own supplier of electricity for Perth, was to change, and the State Electricity Commission of WA was formed. And in forming that, this organisation took over Perth initially and then gradually developed a power system from there and took over the years the small country towns right throughout the state and managed to modernise them up to new standards so people could have the typical electrical appliances.
Around about 1967, the SEC, State Electricity Commission, they had power going to Quinninup, which was one of the first wholly electrified mills that there was. Northcliffe was not at that stage. With the power going to Quinninup, it wasn't that far through the bush to extend the line to Northcliffe. With that power coming through to enable us to power both sawmills, it made it available to the town of Northcliffe for them to have their first power in the town, like permanent power supply. Up until that point, people had their little, petrol engines, kerosene engines, little 32 volt generator sets and some batteries, so they had a light they could turn on at night, and they were very, very dull, you couldn't see much. And so without the mill going onto it, there might have been some time before Northcliffe actually got powered up itself.
I joined the SEC in 1972 and I worked at Fremantle in the distribution system until about 1983. And then I was asked to go into head office because the computing guys, they were looking for the next big project, and they basically decided that if they could capture the network, there'd be a lot of benefits in it. And basically they wrote the programs to do this, and when the programs were finished, we had teams of people who captured the information off the hard copy maps and captured it into the computer. And of course this took quite a number of years to do. The staff had to be trained and we had to take their hard copy maps away from them. So there was a lot of very big sized photocopying done before we could remove the maps. The copying was done unbeknown to us, of course, and we had ceremonial bonfires when we burnt the maps to force the people to use the computer. Remember, these are people who've lived through change all their life, and so this was just another change along the track. And so they were quite accepting of it. And of course, this was in the days of the very first PCs, and when we moved from the 386 machines to the 486s, of course, everything ran so much faster, and they were so pleased to have all this new technology. And then, of course, the Pentiums came along, and so it was just great. The people were so pleased that it all went so well. And it got to the stage where one person rang up, you could see where they were. When the second one rang, you could determine which protective device it operated. And so the faultman went straight to the cause of the fault. And it just became greatly simplified. And all of that management of the network from faults and from switching became really quite high tech.
I spent over 40 years with the old SEC and eventually the new Western Power. Most of my time working with transformers in substations. There's about 150 substations throughout the South West Interconnected grid, spreading from Albany down south out to Kalgoorlie and up to Kalbarri. These substations interconnect the power stations with the local industries in the suburbs and reduce the voltage down to typically 22,000 volts, so then it can be distributed around the streets. These substations that are sort of outliers geographically, there is providing the loads aren't too excessive, there's the opportunities for solar and wind and batteries, very much so. They talk of microgrids being developed in the rural areas where a self-contained grid system has a generation in supporting the customers in that area.
Yeah, we've got a pretty large substation right behind us, but getting power onto our pump was going to be very expensive. So we opted for a diesel pump and everything's run remotely. So it all comes back wirelessly to a router in our shed here, and then it's sent back to my computer. So I can get real-time information every 15 minutes, and that tells me what my trigger points are for irrigation and how it's all travelling. It's largely price-driven, and it's also reliability. I'm completely off the grid here, so there's no interruptions, and it gives me exactly what I need. I don't need to have any input at all from the state grid, so it's just works.
We decided to get solar at the Truffle and Wine Co. Essentially because there's a financial advantage, but there's also an environmental advantage. So it's a no-brainer. There's an upfront cost, but it's paying for itself very quickly within 3 years. Fortunately, it's been around for a long time, so the price is now at a point where it's easy to get into and pays for itself very quickly.
One of our biggest costs was electricity, so with that, the packing sheds, the cool rooms, all the infrastructure around it, it's a big cost. So we looked into putting in a solar system to reduce that cost or offset it at least. So we started with 40 kilowatt and we'll eventuate to a 100 kilowatt system. Because of the rapid capital growth that we've had on site here, we haven't seen a huge reduction in cost, but it's offset a lot of the machinery and cool rooms that are in work now.
It was costing us around about $600 a week in power to run the facility here. So part of our annual review was to review what's costing us too much, and we decided to switch over to solar as a result of that. Actually, it was a real no-brainer for us. Because of the high cost of power that we were spending, we decided we would start off without batteries and just getting the panels and the inverter. The panels and the inverter probably cost us about $44,000 installed, of which we'll get a carbon rebate of about $14,000. So that takes it back to around about $30,000, which the savings will be at least $10,000 a year. So the loan will pay itself off in 3 years, and after that our power's free. Because we work pretty hard on the farm, we're looking for opportunities to get off the farm and have a bit of a break, and probably about 7 or 8 years ago the Shire released some land down at Windy Harbour, which we were fortunate to get one of those blocks, build a house down there, but again it came down to no power. There's actually scheme water down there but no power, so we had to look into an off-grid standalone power system, which was very, very interesting, and so that's what we've built down there. That actually gave us an insight into what we needed to look at for our business here.
In 2005, I started spending more time here. Decided to renovate the house in 2007, 2008, and we put solar on, and what a difference from kerosene lamps and candles and blackened ceilings from lamps and Kero fridges to actually having to be able to turn a light on was really fabulous. Well,
we're like everyone at home. We've got solar panels on the roof, but unless you're at home all day, you don't really get any benefit out of it. So batteries ultimately are the thing that we want to see improved. And I'd love to see battery technology for electric cars for farming. I mean, from a farmer's point of view, you can come to the farm, plug your ute in, go off and do a day's work and come back. It's fantastic, but at the moment, you can't get them. So that's something I'm really hope will change in the fairly near future.
There's a lot of misinformation, and even I've been confused about whether solar is actually more environmentally friendly, because they talk about the mining and everything to get the silica. Or anyway, I listen to a lot of Dr. Carl, and he assures me that that solar is more environmentally friendly. The solar panels up there will last 25-30 years at least, and that's saving a lot of coal.
With any business, it's restructuring and refinement of roles, and if you don't go with the change, you become a dinosaur.
Well, electricity is available from many, many forms. One being battery, what we generate in generation, solar panels produce it, wind turbines produce it, but it all goes back to the basics, that electricity is moving electrons along a copper wire, so that we end up with the energy at another spot. And so that's what we've depended on, and still will depend on it for a long time into the future.